Captain Elijah Vance stood at the bridge of the Resolute, staring out into the endless stretch of space. The cold, empty void of the galaxy felt different today. For years, he had patrolled the outer borders of the Zeorian Empire, a vast alien civilization that had once ruled with an iron fist, but now stood on the brink of collapse. The rebellion, led by former allies and driven by greed, was quickly overwhelming the remnants of the Empire's fleet. And yet, in the midst of it all, something felt off. The usual sense of duty that kept him focused had become clouded, replaced by an unfamiliar sense of doubt. The order had come down just hours ago, an all-out assault on the heart of the Zeorian Empire. The Galactic Alliance, his employers, had deemed it the final blow needed to break the crumbling Empire's hold on the galaxy. The Empire was dying, but its leaders had proven too dangerous to let live. Captain Vance had his orders, but as he reviewed them again, the weight of the decision gnawed at him. He couldn't help but think of Savak, the Zeorian sovereign, a being he had once considered nothing more than a ruthless dictator, the embodiment of an empire that crushed anything in its path. But over the course of the past few months, Vance had learned things that made him question everything he had ever believed. Savak wasn't the monster the Alliance painted him to be. No, Savak was a man on the verge of losing everything, doing whatever it took to preserve what little remained of his people's once glorious civilization. The sovereign's voice echoed in Vance's mind, as clear as the day they had met. If you leave, the Empire falls, and with it, so does any chance of peace in this galaxy. It had been a simple statement, yet it carried a weight that Vance could not shake. Was he truly the one holding the key to the galaxy's future, or was Savak simply playing a game to keep him from completing his mission? A loud chime broke his thoughts. A message from Savak's private envoy had arrived. Vance's heart sank. He had known this moment was coming. "Captain Vance," came Savak's voice through the comm, "I request an audience." Vance's hand hovered over the console. He had been avoiding this conversation for weeks, but there was no escaping it now. "Open the channel," Vance ordered, his voice steady. The screen flickered, and the image of Savak appeared before him. The sovereign's piercing golden eyes stared back at him, filled with a strange mix of determination and sadness. His pale blue skin shimmered faintly in the dim light of the ship's bridge. Despite the regal presence of the alien ruler, there was a subtle weariness in his posture, as if he had aged years in a matter of months. "Captain Vance," Savak began, his voice calm yet laced with an undeniable urgency, "I have come to offer you one last chance to reconsider your course of action." Vance's jaw tightened. "I don't have time for games, Savak. The Empire is falling apart and you know it. The Alliance has made it clear that this mission is non-negotiable." "I know," Savak replied, "but the truth is, this mission will not just end the Empire. It will destroy the delicate balance that exists between the various factions in the galaxy. Without the Empire to hold them together, chaos will reign. The rebels will be free to spread their influence, and the Alliance will have no one left to oppose them." Vance narrowed his eyes, leaning forward. "And you think I'm supposed to just ignore all that? I've seen the way your people treat others, the way you treated us." Savak didn't flinch. "I was wrong. I see that now. But I have spent years trying to keep my people from destroying themselves. I have sacrificed everything to hold this empire together, and now you, a human, hold the fate of my people in your hands." Vance shook his head, his thoughts a whirlwind. Savak's words rang true, but they also felt like a trap. The Zeorian sovereign was trying to manipulate him, trying to make him feel responsible for the Empire's fate. But Vance couldn't shake the feeling that Savak was being genuine. "Why should I believe you?" Vance finally asked. "Everything I've seen says you're no better than the rest of your empire. You've played the same game of power and control, using your people as pawns. What makes you think I'm going to turn my back on the Alliance for you?" Savak's gaze softened, and for the first time Vance saw the burden in his eyes. because I know what it's like to lose everything, to see your people on the brink of extinction. I have tried to change. I have tried to rebuild. But the truth is, if you leave and follow through with your mission, my people will crumble and all your efforts will be for nothing. Vance's mind raced. He knew what Savak was asking. He was asking him to choose between loyalty to the Alliance and the survival of a civilization he had once sworn to destroy. For a long moment, Vance said nothing. The weight of the decision was suffocating, pressing down on him like the weight of 1,000 stars. He could feel the eyes of the galaxy upon him, waiting for his decision. But what choice did he have? I can't let you destroy everything, Savak said, his voice barely above a whisper. If you do this, the galaxy will suffer for it. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Vance exhaled deeply, his resolve hardening. I can't stop this mission, he said, his voice steady. But I promise you, I will do everything in my power to ensure that the Empire doesn't fall without a chance for redemption. Savak's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. Then I will trust you, Captain Vance. But remember this, if you leave, the galaxy will not be the same. With that, the communication ended. Vance stared at the blank screen, his heart heavy with the decision he had just made. He knew what needed to be done. He had his orders. But in that moment, he couldn't help but wonder if he was making a mistake. The fate of the galaxy lay in his hands, and he had just sealed its future with a single decision. The Resolute drifted through the black void of space, the hum of its engines a constant reminder of the mission that lay ahead. Captain Elijah Vance stood at the helm, staring at the flickering stars on the viewscreen. His thoughts were a storm of confusion, doubt, and regret. What had Savak said to him? The alien sovereign had shown him a glimpse of a world he had never considered, the possibility of a future where the Zeorian Empire could rise from the ashes, not through domination, but through unity. A future where peace could exist, not just in name, but in truth. Vance had never thought of the Zeorians as anything other than the enemy. To him, they were the conquerors, the oppressors, the ones responsible for years of bloodshed and suffering in the galaxy. But the more he thought about Savak's words, the more he realized that the Empire's downfall wasn't just about tyranny. It was about survival, the very thing that had driven Savak to become the ruler he was today. A sharp chime cut through his thoughts. It was a message from Admiral Harland, the Alliance officer overseeing the operation. Captain Vance, Harland's voice came through the comm, we're on schedule. The fleet is ready. We expect to be in range of Zeorian territory within the next 2 hours. You know what's at stake. You've already made your decision. No turning back. Vance clenched his fist around the armrest of his chair. The pressure of the decision weighed on him more than he cared to admit. The mission was clear. Strike the heart of the Empire, dismantle Savak's forces, and end their reign once and for all. But at what cost? If he followed through with this order, would he be any better than the Zeorians he had sworn to defeat? His mind flashed back to the meeting with Savak. The alien ruler's face, stern but full of emotion, haunted him. If you leave, the Empire falls. Savak's warning echoed in his mind. The question gnawed at him. Was the galaxy ready for a future without the Zeorian Empire? And more importantly, was he ready to live with the consequences of his actions? Before he could respond to Admiral Harland, the screen flickered to life, and a new message appeared. It was from an encrypted source, one that Vance recognized immediately. It was from Savak's emissary, a Zeorian named Kess. The message was brief but urgent. Meet with Savak. Your choice will determine everything. Vance hesitated for only a moment before making his decision. He could ignore the message and proceed with the mission, or he could go to Savak and find out just how far the alien ruler was willing to go to save his people. A part of him felt a strange pull, a need to understand Savak's true intentions. But another part of him, the part that had been trained to follow orders without question, urged him to stay focused on the task at hand. He stood up from his chair, resolving to face whatever lay ahead. He couldn't afford to remain passive anymore. The galaxy needed a solution, not a simple victory. And if he was to be the one to shape that future, he would need to face Savak one more time. The transport shuttle arrived at the designated meeting point within the hour, its engines quiet as it glided into the private docking bay aboard Savak's flagship, the Vibrant Star. Vance stepped off the shuttle, his boots echoing in the empty corridor. The hallways were pristine, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Zeorian guards with their sleek armor and expressionless faces stood at attention, guiding him toward the Sovereign's quarters. When the doors finally opened, Vance was greeted by a sight he hadn't expected. Savak wasn't sitting on a throne or surrounded by grandeur. Instead, he was standing by a large window, staring out into the abyss of space. His posture was weary, and his once regal appearance now seemed more like that of a man who had carried the weight of an entire empire for far too long. "You came," Savak said, his voice quiet but tinged with relief. "I wasn't sure you would." Vance didn't respond at first. He stood silently, watching the alien ruler, unsure of what to say. Part of him wanted to yell, to demand answers, to tell Savak that he couldn't be trusted. But another part of him, the part that had spent hours contemplating the Sovereign's words, felt a strange sense of understanding. "I'm here," Vance said, finally breaking the silence. "But I don't know what you want from me, Savak. You know what I'm ordered to do." "The Alliance doesn't leave room for mercy." Savak turned slowly, meeting Vance's gaze. "Mercy," he echoed softly. "What is mercy but a choice? A choice to see beyond the surface, beyond what is in front of you, and to understand the true cost of our actions. I understand that the Alliance has given you an order, but what they haven't told you, Captain, is that this is not just about an empire. It's about a future for us all." Vance's eyes narrowed. "A future where the Zeorians rule again, where your people continue to oppress others." "Is that what you want me to believe?" Savak's expression hardened, but there was no anger in his eyes, only resignation. "I am not asking for that. I am asking for a chance to rebuild, to offer something different, a future where our people and yours can coexist. But that can only happen if we survive, and for that we need you. I need you to make a choice that goes beyond duty, beyond orders, to make a choice for something bigger than yourself." Vance felt a pang in his chest. He had spent so long fighting against the Zeorian Empire, so long believing in the righteousness of the Alliance's cause. But now, facing Savak, he couldn't deny the truth that was slowly creeping into his mind. This was not about good versus evil. This was about survival. "You want me to betray my people," Vance said softly, though his voice lacked conviction. "You want me to turn against the very order I've sworn to protect." "No," Savak replied firmly. "I want you to make a choice for the future. A choice that will shape the galaxy for generations to come. A choice that will define who we are as people, as species, and as a galaxy. Will you destroy us, or will you help us rise from the ashes?" Vance took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had spent his life following orders, believing that the galaxy was a simple place of right and wrong. But this was different. There was no simple answer, no clear path, only the uncertainty of what lay ahead. "I don't know if I can make that choice," Vance said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'll give you one thing. I'll give you the chance to prove that the galaxy isn't as lost as we all think." Savak's eyes softened, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "That is all I ask, Captain. That is all I need." The final days of the Zeorian Empire were upon them, yet Captain Elijah Vance could not shake the weight of his decision. The Resolute hung in orbit above the capital world of the Zeorian Empire, its sleek hull reflecting the light of distant stars. In the quiet of the ship's command deck, Vance stood alone, staring out into space. The image of Savak's solemn face, The hope that had flickered in his eyes haunted him. He had given Savak a chance to prove that the galaxy could be more than just a battleground for power, that peace might someday be possible. Yet the path he had chosen now seemed more uncertain than ever. The Alliance had made it clear that there would be no turning back. If he failed to follow through with the mission, the rebellion would rise in full force, and the balance of power in the galaxy would be irrevocably shifted. "Captain, we are receiving the final orders from Admiral Harland." The voice of his communications officer interrupted his thoughts. "The fleet is ready for the assault. The target coordinates are locked in." Vance took a deep breath. His resolve wavered, but the time for hesitation was gone. There was no easy way forward now. He had to make a decision, and he had to make it quickly. As much as he wanted to believe that Savak's plea for mercy was genuine, the reality of the situation was clear. The Empire was already crumbling. The rebels were too strong, too organized. The power vacuum left by the sovereign's failure to maintain control would only lead to chaos. He could feel the tension in the air, the palpable weight of the moment. His hand hovered over the control panel, where the final authorization for the attack was waiting. A single touch, and the Empire would begin to fall. But as his fingers hovered over the screen, another voice echoed in his mind. Savak's voice, calm and measured. "If you leave, the Empire falls." Vance had promised Savak he would give him a chance to prove that the galaxy wasn't as lost as it seemed. And now, standing at the precipice of war, he realized he could no longer ignore the consequences of his actions. Was he truly willing to destroy everything, to wipe out the possibility of peace, just to follow orders? A soft chime interrupted his thoughts again, this time with a message from Savak himself. The Sovereign's face appeared on the screen, the familiar intensity of his gaze directed straight at Vance. "You have made your choice," Savak said, his voice steady, though the weariness in his expression was apparent. "But I need you to understand what you are truly choosing. If you carry out this assault, the galaxy will be irrevocably changed. Not just for my people, but for yours. The chaos that will follow will burn the galaxy to the ground." Vance clenched his jaw, torn between duty and a growing sense of responsibility. Savak was right. The Zeorian Empire, despite its flaws, had held the galaxy together in a fragile balance. If the Empire fell, the aftermath would be worse than anyone could imagine. Even the Alliance's grand plan for peace seemed more like a utopian fantasy than a practical solution. "I know the stakes, Savak," Vance replied, his voice tight with emotion. "But I can't abandon the mission. The Alliance is counting on me to end this, to end the war." Savak's expression softened, and for a moment it almost seemed like he understood. "Then, Captain, I ask one final thing of you." The Sovereign's voice grew quieter, almost pleading. "Help me. Help me rebuild. Don't let my people fall into the hands of those who would exploit our weakness. Help me secure a future where we can live in peace. If we are to rebuild, we need you." The silence that followed was heavy. Vance felt the weight of the Sovereign's words settle deep into his chest. This was no longer just about the Zeorians or the Alliance. This was about the galaxy as a whole, and the future that would unfold depending on his next move. The line between right and wrong had become blurred, and Vance could no longer see a clear path forward. He took a deep breath, then made his decision. His finger moved with deliberate intent, pressing the authorization key to hold off the assault, temporarily halting the mission. The action sent shockwaves through the command deck, and his officers exchanged puzzled glances. "Captain," his communications officer asked, unable to hide the confusion in his voice. Vance stood tall, his gaze fixed on the image of Savak, who was now watching him with cautious hope. "We're not attacking today," Vance said, his voice firm. "We're going to negotiate. I'll give you the chance to prove it, Savak, but you'll have to show the galaxy that your vision is more than just words." The Sovereign nodded, the faintest glimmer of relief crossing his face. "Thank you. You will not regret this, Captain. The fleet's assault had been postponed, but the real battle had only just begun. Vance and Savak arranged a meeting with representatives from the Galactic Alliance and various rebel factions. It would be the first chance in decades for meaningful dialogue between the disparate groups fighting for control of the galaxy. The day of the meeting arrived, and Vance stood at the front of a large conference room aboard Savak's flagship. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. The representatives from the Alliance, the Rebels, and the Zeorian Empire were all present, each one wary of the other. The room was tense with suspicion, each side ready to leap at the slightest provocation. Vance glanced at Savak, who stood beside him, regal yet solemn. The sovereign had chosen to wear simple robes instead of the heavy armor he was known for, and his posture, though still dignified, conveyed the exhaustion of a ruler who had fought his entire life for a cause that seemed on the verge of collapse. "The time for fighting is over," Vance said, his voice calm but strong. "We have a chance here to avoid further bloodshed, but only if we can find a way to work together." The representatives exchanged uneasy glances, but none spoke. The room was heavy with tension as both sides weighed the implications of what Vance was saying. The idea of peace seemed impossible to most of them. For so long, they had known nothing but war. Savak stepped forward, his voice carrying a deep sense of authority. "We have all been manipulated by those who seek to divide us. The Empire, the Alliance, and the Rebels are all pawns in a game we do not fully understand. It is time to end that game. I offer you a future, not based on war but on cooperation. A galaxy united, not through conquest but through shared understanding." The representatives remained silent, their expressions hard to read. But there was a flicker of something in their eyes, a spark of hope that had long been extinguished. Savak continued, "This will not be easy, but together we can rebuild. We can find a path forward that is not dictated by bloodshed and violence. We must act now before it is too late." For a long moment there was nothing but silence. But then a voice from the back of the room broke through. "If there's even a chance that peace is possible, we'll listen. But we must see action, not just promises." Vance turned to face the speaker, a rebel leader whose name he didn't know but whose eyes were filled with the same uncertainty that had plagued him for so long. "We'll show you action," Vance said. "We'll show you that peace is worth fighting for." It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the meeting broke up and the representatives began to leave, Vance found himself standing alone with Savak once more. The sovereign's eyes met his, and for the first time, Vance saw the true weight of the decision he had made reflected in the alien's gaze. "Thank you," Savak said softly. "You have given my people a chance." Vance nodded. "This is only the beginning. The road ahead will be difficult, but we're not alone in this anymore. If we can make it through the next few months, the galaxy will have a chance at something better." Savak smiled faintly, though there was still a sadness in his eyes. "A chance at peace, Captain. A chance at peace." In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to change. Slowly but surely, alliances were forged between former enemies, and the fighting that had torn the galaxy apart began to quiet. It wasn't perfect, and the scars of war would take years to heal, but for the first time in a long while there was hope. Captain Elijah Vance had made a choice, and in doing so he had given the galaxy a chance to rebuild, not through force but through understanding. The Zeorian Empire had fallen, but in its place, something new was beginning to take shape, a fragile peace that could, if nurtured, bring light to the darkness that had long consumed TH.